the town council voted to eliminate Route 7 at exactly 9 o'clock on a rainy Tuesday morning. Before the meeting even ended, two younger drivers were already joking that the old route had finally reached the end of the road. "Guess Sam can enjoy retirement now," one of them laughed as he tossed a schedule onto the dispatch counter. "Maybe he'll stop driving 30 miles an hour everywhere." A few people chuckled. I simply signed my inspection sheet, picked up the worn leather gloves I had used for years, and walked toward bus 27 without answering. The dispatcher called after me. "Sam, today's your last run. No reason to rush?" "I never have." He shook his head with a smile that suggested he thought I hadn't heard the news. I had. Every word. What he didn't know was that the route couldn't end yet. One passenger still hadn't climbed aboard. If you've ever watched Quiet Responsibility mistaken for weakness, I hope you'll stay with me. Morning rain tapped softly against the windshield as I completed the same safety inspection I had performed thousands of times before. Tires, brakes, mirrors, wheelchair lift, emergency equipment, fuel level. Every movement followed the same careful rhythm the Army had taught me decades earlier, when transportation wasn't just about vehicles. It was about making sure people arrived where they needed to go. Route 7 had taught me the same lesson all over again. At the first stop, only 3 passengers climbed aboard. Mrs. Evelyn Carter, who never traveled without knitting needles tucked inside her purse. Mr. Luis Ramirez, who always greeted me with the same quiet salute. And young Tyler Jenkins, a community college student whose classes started before sunrise. "Morning, Sam," Tyler said. "Morning, Mrs." Carter smiled. "They say this is our last ride." "So they do. You don't seem surprised." "I've learned not to argue with calendars." She laughed gently. "But?" I looked through the rain-speckled windshield before pulling away. "Calendars don't always know who still needs the bus." She tilted her head, puzzled by the answer. 20 minutes later, we reached Oak Street, where every schedule said I should stop for exactly 60 seconds. I waited. 1 minute became 2, then 3. The younger driver following behind me tapped his horn in frustration. Tyler checked his watch. "Running late today?" "Not yet." Mrs. Carter looked toward the sidewalk. "Are we waiting for someone?" I glanced at the empty corner. Yes. Just then, transit planner Emma Brooks pulled her city vehicle behind the second bus. Fresh out of graduate school and only 6 months into the job, she had been assigned to observe the final day of Route 7 before preparing its closure report. She stepped onto my bus, holding a clipboard. "Mr. Whitaker? Morning." I noticed we're 3 minutes behind schedule. That's correct. Mechanical issue? No. She frowned politely. Then why are we waiting? Before I could answer, an elderly man appeared at the far end of the sidewalk. He leaned heavily on 2 forearm crutches, moving as quickly as his damaged legs allowed through the rain. I quietly opened the doors. No one complained. The man climbed aboard slowly. "Sorry, Sam," he whispered. "Elevator stopped working again." "You made it." "Wouldn't have without you." He tapped his transit card, nodded gratefully, and settled into the front priority seat. Emma looked down at her clipboard. According to every official timetable, the bus should already have been gone. Instead, I simply closed the doors and continued driving. Several minutes later, while reviewing the dispatch system on her tablet, Emma frowned. The same unexplained 3-minute delay appeared beside my morning departure. Not just today, Yesterday, last week, last month, month after month, year after year. She looked up from the screen, then toward me. For the first time, she wasn't seeing an old driver who couldn't keep time. She was seeing a pattern she couldn't explain. Emma remained on the bus for the rest of the morning, though she spent less time looking at her tablet than she did watching the passengers. By the fourth stop, she had stopped writing numbers altogether and started writing names. Mrs. Evelyn Carter stepped off in front of the public library. Before the doors closed, Sam called after her. "Your granddaughter's recital is Friday, isn't it?" She turned with a surprised smile. "You remembered. You've mentioned it every Tuesday for 3 weeks." She laughed. "I suppose I have. Tell Emma she plays the violin beautifully." Mrs. Carter looked toward the young planner. "He remembers things that matter." Then she disappeared into the drizzle. Emma made another note. Not schedule, not mileage. Memory. At the next stop, Mr. Luis Ramirez boarded carrying a paper bag from the neighborhood bakery. Without saying a word, Sam lowered the bus just enough to shorten the first step. Luis climbed aboard more comfortably than before. "You didn't have to kneel the bus," Emma whispered. "I know." "Then why did you?" He'd never ask. Luis quietly overheard them. He figured out my knees were getting worse almost a year before my doctor admitted they were. He smiled toward Sam. "Never embarrassed me by asking." Emma watched Sam pull away from the curb. "You notice everything." "I notice routines." The answer sounded ordinary. Yet the more she watched, the less ordinary it became. By late morning, the bus reached Riverside Medical Plaza. The elderly passenger with the forearm crutches slowly stood. Emma instinctively stepped forward to help. The man politely declined. "I've got it." Sam never moved from his seat. Instead, he simply kept the doors open. No announcements, no hurry, no sympathetic looks. The passenger reached the sidewalk on his own before turning back. "Same time Thursday? If the wheels are still turning, they always are." After he disappeared inside the clinic, Emma looked at the dashboard clock. "We're exactly 3 minutes behind." "Yes. But somehow we'll still reach the terminal on time." "We always do." She frowned. "How?" "I stopped wasting time where nobody needed it." Emma stared at him. "You shortened other stops." "I stopped making announcements no one listened to." "You adjusted fueling. Finished it before sunrise." "You organized boarding." "People appreciate knowing where to stand." Every answer sounded simple. Together they formed something remarkable. Nothing about Route 7 had become slower. It had become kinder. At the transit garage after the morning shift, Emma asked permission to review historical maintenance records. The clerk pointed toward several dusty archive boxes. "Nobody's looked at those in years." She spent the afternoon turning faded pages. Oil changes, brake inspections, tire replacements. Everything appeared routine, until she noticed handwritten comments squeezed into the margins. "Held departure 2 minutes, dialysis rider. Lift checked early, veteran transfer. Rain delay coordinated with clinic." None of the notes were highlighted. None had ever been reported as achievements. They simply lived beside maintenance entries, as though compassion were another mechanical adjustment. Emma pulled another binder from the shelf, then another. The same careful handwriting stretched back year after year. Always small, always consistent, always explaining a delay of 2 or 3 minutes, never asking for recognition. A retired mechanic wandered past and noticed the stack of records. "Looking at Sam's paperwork?" She nodded. "Were these delays ever a problem?" He laughed softly. "Funny thing." "What?" "He was the only driver whose complaints kept going down while his route stayed perfectly on budget." Emma looked back at the maintenance logs. Numbers had hidden a lifetime of kindness in plain sight. Just before closing the final binder, one folded passenger note slipped onto the desk. It wasn't addressed to the transit department. It simply read, "Please don't make driver Whitaker thank me. He protects our dignity by pretending these extra minutes are for the bus, not for us." There was no signature, only one small handwritten initial. H. The note with the single handwritten initial stayed on Emma's desk long after everyone else had gone home. She turned it over several times, hoping to find another clue, but the back was blank. Only the front carried the carefully written sentence thanking Sam for protecting someone's dignity instead of drawing attention to their struggle. The next morning, she arrived at the transit garage before sunrise. Sam was already there. He stood beside bus 27 with a flashlight, checking tire pressure while the rest of the fleet still slept beneath the warehouse lights. At 74, he moved more slowly than he once had, yet every inspection followed the same precise order. Nothing was rushed, nothing was forgotten. Emma walked over holding the passenger note. "Can I ask you something?" "You just did." She smiled. "Who is H?" Sam looked at the folded paper only briefly before returning to the front tire. "A passenger. I figured that much. He prefers it that way. You know exactly who wrote this." "I do. Why won't you tell me?" He placed the pressure gauge back into its holder. "Because the note wasn't written for an investigation." Emma folded her arms. "I'm trying to understand why Route 7 matters." "So write it." "I already have. You've watched one morning." He gently closed the maintenance compartment. "I've watched 31 years. There was no arrogance in his voice, only perspective. By 7 o'clock, the bus was full again. Emma chose a seat halfway down the aisle, this time paying less attention to schedules and more attention to people. She noticed that Sam greeted every passenger differently. Some received a joke, some received silence, others received only a nod. He somehow knew exactly what each person needed before they spoke. Halfway through the route, the elderly man with the forearm crutches boarded once more. Instead of sitting immediately, he walked toward Emma. "I suppose you're the one studying our driver." "I am." He extended a weathered hand. "Harold Benson." Emma shook it. "Mr. Benson." "Harold." She hesitated. "Were you the one who wrote the note?" A faint smile crossed his face. "So he still kept it." "He never answered my question." "He wouldn't." Harold lowered himself carefully into the priority seat. "I served in the Marine Corps. Lost most of the strength in my legs years later after a spinal injury." Emma listened quietly. "I refused paratransit because I didn't want special treatment." "So you started taking Route 7. "I almost stopped." "Why?" He looked toward Sam, who was helping another passenger secure a walker. "Because I couldn't reach the stop before departure." Emma slowly understood. The 3 minutes. Harold nodded. The first morning he waited, he blamed a brake inspection. The second morning? Mirror adjustment. And after that? Harold smiled. He invented ordinary reasons so I never had to feel like the bus waited for me. Emma glanced toward the driver's seat. He protected your pride. He protected everyone's. As they reached Riverside Medical Plaza, another elderly woman quietly thanked Sam before stepping off. So did she need extra time too? Emma asked. Harold nodded. Dialysis. What about Mrs. Carter? Arthritis. Mr. Ramirez? Both knees replaced. Emma looked around the nearly empty bus. None of them had ever asked for favors. Sam had simply arranged his work so they never needed to. Back at the transit office that afternoon, Emma opened another archive box. Instead of maintenance records, this one contained route performance reviews dating back decades. Most were ordinary. Until one inspection report caught her attention. Driver Samuel Whitaker consistently completes Route 7 within operational limits despite recurring minor delays. Passenger complaints remain lowest in the district. Recommend observing methods. Attached behind it was a handwritten memo from an inspector. Unable to identify reason, passengers appear unusually calm. Driver demonstrates exceptional anticipation of rider needs. Emma smiled. They had been measuring punctuality. No one had realized they were witnessing compassion engineered into a timetable. As she closed the folder, one final document slipped free. It wasn't written by the transit department. It came from Riverside Medical Center. Across the top, in faded ink, were the words, Confidential Community Transportation Appreciation. The signature at the bottom belonged to the hospital's medical director, and the date was 29 years old. Emma held the faded hospital letter as though it might fall apart in her hands. The paper had yellowed with age, but the official seal from Riverside Medical Center was still visible in the corner. She carefully unfolded the pages while the afternoon sun stretched across the transit office. To driver Samuel Whitaker, it began. Your consistent reliability has prevented dozens of missed dialysis, rehabilitation, oncology, and cardiac appointments over the past 2 years. Although your work falls outside formal medical care, our staff recognizes that treatment means little if patients cannot reach it with dignity. Emma slowly lowered the letter. This wasn't a thank you note. It was evidence. She immediately drove to Riverside Medical Center, where the current medical director introduced her to retired administrator Dr. Margaret Collins, now 83 years old, but still volunteering twice a week. The moment Dr. Collins saw Sam's name on the letter, she smiled. I wondered if someone would ask about him someday. Emma placed the document on the table. You wrote this? I did. Why wasn't it ever shared with the transit department? Doctor, Collins folded her hands. Because Sam asked us not to. Emma blinked. He refused recognition? He said our patients needed quiet transportation, not a public hero. The elderly doctor walked to a filing cabinet and removed another folder. For years, we tracked appointment attendance. Around the time Sam began driving Route 7, missed visits dropped dramatically. She handed Emma several old reports. The pattern was unmistakable. Whenever Sam was assigned to Route 7, elderly patients arrived more consistently, canceled fewer appointments, and completed longer treatment plans. He never entered the hospital, Dr. Collins explained. He simply made arriving possible. Emma looked at the numbers in silence. No awards, no newspaper articles, just healthier lives hidden behind transportation statistics. What made him start doing all this? She finally asked Dr. Collins looked through the window for a long moment before answering. It wasn't this hospital. What do you mean? It happened years earlier. She reached into the folder again and removed a single newspaper clipping. The headline read, "Local man misses father's final hours after winter bus breakdown." Emma's heart sank. The photograph beneath the headline showed a much younger Samuel Whitaker standing beside a disabled bus on an icy road. "He told you?" Emma whispered. "No. He never talks about himself. He didn't have to." Dr. Collins gently touched the article. After his father died before he could reach the hospital, Sam promised himself no family would lose precious time because transportation failed when compassion could have made the difference. Emma suddenly understood why every delay had been measured in minutes instead of excuses. Each one was a promise. Not to the transit department, not to the town, to one grieving son who had once arrived too late. Back at the transit office, Emma requested the complete operational history for Route 7. Transit Director Olivia Grant entered carrying the proposed budget. "I heard you've spent 3 days chasing one bus driver." "I'm following evidence." Olivia sighed. "The numbers don't support keeping the route." Emma laid the hospital reports, maintenance logs, passenger notes, and appointment records across the conference table. "Maybe we've been measuring the wrong numbers." Olivia looked unconvinced. "Budget hearings are tomorrow morning." "I know. The council expects my recommendation." Emma nodded. "So do I." That evening, Sam completed another quiet shift without mentioning hospitals, old newspaper articles, or promises. As he parked bus 27 for the night, he removed his worn driver's watch and carefully wound it before placing it back on his wrist. Emma noticed the gesture from across the garage. "You still wind it every day?" "It belonged to my father." She looked toward the empty Route 7 bus. "Is that why you've never been late?" Sam smiled faintly. "No." He gently rested one hand on the steering wheel. "It's because someone is always waiting." As he walked away, Emma looked back at the budget proposal in her hands. Tomorrow's council vote would decide the future of Route 7. For the first time, she knew the debate was no longer about transportation. It was about whether compassion had a place in the town's definition of efficiency. The budget hearing was less than 24 hours away, yet Sam never mentioned it during his final week on Route 7. He drove the same streets, greeted the same passengers, and checked the same mirrors as though nothing unusual waited on tomorrow's calendar. Emma found him at the garage just after sunset, wiping rainwater from the bus windows with slow, practiced strokes. "Don't you want to know what I'm presenting?" He smiled without looking up. "If you've done your homework, I'll hear about it soon enough." "You could lose your route." "I already have." She stood beside him for several moments before speaking again. "Why aren't you fighting?" Sam folded the cloth neatly over the bucket handle. "Because I never drove Route 7 to keep a job." "What did you drive it for?" He rested one hand against the weathered side of bus 27. "For the people waiting at the next stop." The simplicity of the answer somehow made it heavier. Emma opened her folder. I've documented 31 years of maintenance records, hospital attendance reports, passenger notes, and operational data. The evidence is stronger than I expected. It wasn't meant to become evidence. I know. It was meant to become routine. That sentence stayed with her long after they locked the garage. The following morning, she visited several passengers before the council meeting. Mrs. Carter answered her door wearing a knitted blue sweater. When Emma explained the situation, the elderly woman quietly invited her inside. I suppose this day was always coming. Were you ever aware Sam adjusted the schedule for you? Mrs. Carter smiled. I pretended not to notice. Why? Because he pretended not to notice that I couldn't walk as quickly after my hip surgery. Emma looked around the small living room. Photographs of grandchildren covered every shelf. He never treated me like someone who needed help. He simply made sure the help was already there. Next, Emma visited Luis Ramirez. The retired carpenter laughed softly when she mentioned Route 7. I spent 6 months pretending my knees weren't failing. Did Sam know? He started lowering the bus before I admitted it to myself. What did he say? Luis shook his head. Nothing. He never mentioned your knees. He respected me too much. By noon, Emma had spoken with 8 regular passengers. Every story sounded different. Every ending sounded the same. Sam had quietly changed something so they could preserve their independence. Not one of them believed they had received special treatment. That afternoon, Emma stopped at Harold Benson's apartment. The disabled Marine veteran opened the door carrying a folded transit schedule. I figured you'd come. She nodded. I need to ask something difficult. Go ahead. If Route 7 disappears, Harold looked toward the bus schedule before she finished. I'll find another way. But it will take 2 transfers. I've done harder things. Emma hesitated. Would you tell the council that? Harold remained silent for several seconds. Only if they understand one thing. What? I'm not asking them to save me. He handed her the folded schedule. I'm asking them not to force people to choose between dignity and transportation. As Emma drove toward City Hall, her phone rang. It was Transit Director Olivia Grant. I've reviewed everything you submitted. And? The council still expects a recommendation based on operating costs. Emma tightened her grip on the steering wheel. What will you recommend? Olivia answered honestly. I don't know anymore. That uncertainty alone felt like progress. Late that evening, Sam quietly emptied his driver's locker. 1 pair of gloves, a flashlight, his lunch thermos, and the old silver watch his father had once worn. Nothing else. The younger drivers walked past, offering polite goodbyes, still believing retirement had simply arrived on schedule. None of them noticed Sam quietly placing 1 folded envelope inside the dispatch mailbox. Across the front, he had written only 6 words. For whoever drives Route 7 next. When Emma arrived early the following morning, she found the envelope waiting. Before she could open it, a maintenance supervisor hurried into the office. Emma, what is it? He looked genuinely troubled. Sam didn't report for today's shift. For the first time in 31 years, Route 7 was sitting in the garage without its driver. Emma stood frozen beside the dispatch counter, staring at the envelope with Sam's careful handwriting while the maintenance supervisor searched the garage one more time. He isn't answering his phone, the supervisor said quietly. I've checked the parking lot too. Emma picked up the envelope. The paper felt heavier than it should have. She opened it carefully. Inside was only a single handwritten page. To whoever has the privilege of driving Route 7 next. She stopped reading for a moment. Not if someone drove it. Whoever, Sam had never believed the route truly belonged to him. She continued. You'll learn the schedule quickly. What takes longer is learning the people. Some riders will insist they're fine when they aren't. Some will apologize for taking too long. Never let them apologize for growing older. If you can spare a minute without failing the next passenger, spend it. People remember dignity much longer than punctuality. At the bottom of the page was one final sentence. The route works because everyone believes the bus is waiting for traffic. Never for them. Emma folded the letter with trembling hands. This wasn't retirement advice. It was a philosophy. Transit Director Olivia Grant entered the office moments later, carrying the council agenda. Any sign of Sam? Emma quietly shook her head. Olivia noticed the letter. What's that? The reason Route 7 has never really been about buses. Without another word, Emma handed her the page. Olivia read every line in silence. When she reached the final sentence, she slowly lowered the paper. I've spent 15 years managing transit, she whispered. I've never thought about dignity this way. Neither had Emma. A mechanic hurried into the office. We found bus 27. Emma looked up. Where? Parked at the first stop? Empty? The mechanic nodded. But the engine's warm. Emma and Olivia drove there immediately. The old bus stood exactly where Route 7 always began. Its doors were open. Inside, every seat was empty except one. Sam's worn lunch thermos rested in the front row. Nothing else. Emma stepped aboard. The bus felt strangely alive despite the silence. She noticed something she had overlooked dozens of times before. Above the driver's seat, tucked behind the sun visor, was a small handwritten card. Drive the people, not the timetable. She smiled sadly. The sentence explained 31 years in 6 words. Just then, Harold Benson appeared slowly from across the street, leaning on his forearm crutches. I figured you'd be here. Emma stepped off the bus. Have you seen Sam? Harold nodded toward Riverside Medical Center several blocks away. He told me yesterday he'd make one stop before saying goodbye. Emma's heart tightened. The hospital? He visits every year. Why? Harold looked at the bus before answering. To thank the nurses who stayed with his father when he couldn't. Emma understood. Even after 3 decades, Sam still honored the people who had shown compassion during the worst day of his life. Meanwhile, City Hall filled with council members preparing for the budget hearing. Some believed Route 7 would be closed before lunchtime. Others expected a routine vote. None of them knew Emma had replaced her financial presentation with something entirely different. Instead of beginning with ridership charts, she had assembled maintenance logs, hospital attendance reports, passenger notes, historical schedules, and Sam's handwritten letter. Each piece of evidence now told the same story. Not inefficient transportation. Intentional service. Olivia quietly reviewed the presentation one last time. If we do this, she said, the discussion changes. It has to. The council may still vote against us. Emma nodded. I know. They'll ask whether one driver's kindness justifies an entire route. Emma looked toward the window where bus 27 remained parked in the distance. They're asking the wrong question. Olivia waited. Emma answered softly. The real question is whether a community can afford to lose the kind of kindness that keeps people independent. Just then, Emma's phone vibrated. A short text message appeared. Leaving the hospital now. I'll be there when it's time. Emma smiled for the first time that morning. He hadn't disappeared. He had simply finished keeping one more promise before anyone tried to honor him. By the time Emma and Sam entered the council chamber together, every seat was filled. Transit employees stood along the back wall. Regular passengers sat quietly in the front rows. Several younger drivers who had once laughed about Route 7 now watched in uncomfortable silence, realizing the meeting had become something far larger than a budget discussion. Council President Richard Hale adjusted his glasses. We're here to determine the future of Route 7. Emma carried no oversized presentation boards, only one weathered maintenance binder. Sam's folded letter, the hospital reports, and a single transit schedule worn soft by years of use. Olivia Grant rose first. My original recommendation was to discontinue Route 7 based solely on operating costs. She paused. That recommendation was incomplete. Several council members exchanged surprised glances. Olivia stepped aside. Emma Brooks has evidence the council deserves to hear before making its final decision. Emma walked to the podium. For the last 31 years, we've measured this route by fuel, mileage, ridership, and expense. She opened the first maintenance binder. We never measured what happened after passengers arrived. The room grew still. She projected copies of Sam's handwritten maintenance notes onto the screen. Wheelchair boarding, dialysis timing, rain delay, veteran transfer. None lasted longer than a few words, yet together they formed an unmistakable pattern. A council member frowned. Couldn't another driver simply do the same thing? Emma nodded. Yes. The answer surprised everyone. She continued. Which is exactly why this story isn't about replacing Sam. She held up the handwritten letter. It's about understanding what we've been replacing. Next, she displayed hospital attendance records. Appointment completion improved. Missed treatments declined. Emergency cancellations fell. Every improvement began after Sam inherited Route 7. Still, Councilman Brooks leaned forward. These results are admirable, but budgets still matter. They do, Emma agreed. So what are you asking us to preserve? Before she answered, Harold Benson slowly rose from the audience. Leaning on his forearm crutches, he approached the microphone. I'd like permission to respond. The chairman nodded. Harold looked around the chamber. I spent 22 years in the Marine Corps. No one interrupted. When my legs stopped cooperating, everyone wanted to help. He smiled gently. Sam was different. He glanced toward the elderly driver. He never helped me. A few people looked confused. Harold continued. He simply arranged things so I never had to ask. The chamber became completely silent. Mrs. Evelyn Carter stood next. He remembered my bad hip without reminding me I had one. Luis Ramirez followed. He lowered the bus before I admitted my knees were failing. One after another, passengers quietly shared nearly identical stories. No dramatic speeches. No tears meant to persuade, only ordinary moments that had preserved extraordinary dignity. Finally, Emma placed Sam's father's newspaper clipping aside the maintenance records. This is where it began. She explained how a younger Sam had once arrived too late to say goodbye because transportation failed when minutes mattered. He spent the rest of his life making sure someone else never experienced that same regret. Council President Hale looked toward Sam. "Mr. Whitaker." Sam stood slowly. "I don't want a monument. No one is offering one. I don't need an award. We're not discussing awards." Sam smiled faintly. "Good." He held up the folded transit schedule he had carried for decades. "If Route 7 disappears, someone else will eventually figure things out." He paused. "But if the habit of protecting people's dignity disappears," he looked around the room, "that takes much longer to rebuild." Silence settled over every row. The younger driver who had mocked Sam on Tuesday quietly stood. "I'd like to apologize." Sam gently raised one hand. "Drive better. Nothing more." The young man nodded with moist eyes. "I will." Council President Hale looked at the other members. "I believe we have enough information." The vote was called. One by one, lights illuminated across the electronic board. Not simply to preserve Route 7, but to redesign it permanently as a community service route whose operating standards would include protected boarding time for elderly riders, veterans, passengers with disabilities, and medical appointments. The motion passed unanimously. Sam closed his eyes for only a moment. When he opened them again, he wasn't looking at the council. He was looking at the passengers. For the first time in 31 years, he knew they would never have to wonder whether someone would still wait for them. 1 month later, Route 7 rolled away from the transit garage with a different driver behind the wheel. Yet almost everything else remained the same. The bus paused an extra few moments at Oak Street. The wheelchair lift was prepared before anyone asked for it. The suspension gently lowered for passengers with aching knees. No announcements called attention to slower boarding. No one was made to feel like a burden. Only one thing had changed. The timetable now officially included those few quiet minutes Sam had once hidden inside maintenance logs. The new schedule called them community care stops. Everyone else simply called them kindness. I stood on the sidewalk instead of behind the steering wheel, my father's old watch resting comfortably on my wrist. Beside me stood the young driver who had once joked about my retirement. His name was Daniel Price. Before his first official run, I handed him the folded letter I had left in the dispatch mailbox. He smiled after reading the final sentence. "I understand now." "No," I said gently. "You'll understand after a few thousand mornings." He laughed. "I suppose you're right." As the doors opened, Harold Benson climbed aboard using his forearm crutches. Daniel waited without looking at the clock. Harold smiled knowingly. "Good morning, driver." "Good morning, Harold." No apology, no embarrassment, only respect. Mrs. Carter followed a few moments later, carrying another unfinished scarf. Luis Ramirez climbed aboard with steady confidence. One by one, familiar faces filled the seats. The route had survived. More importantly, so had its purpose. Transit Director Olivia Grant later announced that every new driver would receive training based not only on safety and efficiency, but also on preserving passenger dignity through thoughtful service. The maintenance records that once seemed ordinary would become part of that training, reminding future employees that professionalism could be measured in compassion as well as punctuality. As for me, retirement turned out to be quieter than I expected. Every Thursday morning, I walked to Oak Street with a cup of coffee and watched Bus 27 arrive exactly when it should. Sometimes it paused just a little longer. Sometimes it didn't need to. Either way, I smiled. If this story reminds you that the strongest communities are often built by people who quietly keep showing up, I hope you'll carry that lesson into someone else's day. A few extra moments of patience may become the memory another person never forgets. Thank you for traveling this journey with me. May God bless you, and may we always find the wisdom to measure success not only by arriving on time, but by making sure no one is left behind.